Today is September 6th, 2023, and this is an interview with Margaret Rainwater and her son, Mark Rainwater, at the Lawndale Museum in Rockledge, Florida. Interviewers are Rosie DeFrancisci and Carole Pope. Thank you so much for being here, Margaret and Mark. We appreciate you sharing your family's history with us. So let's start at the beginning. Margaret, please tell us where you were born and when.
I was born in Fort Pierce, Florida, in St. Lucie County, in the family home, which was 7 miles west of Fort Pierce. I was born in the home.
And why was your family in Fort Pierce?
Pardon?
Why was your family in Fort Pierce?
My father was in Fort Pierce because in the 1890s there were massive freezes that wiped out citrus in this area, which was their income. And he and his father decided that he should move to an area south of here that would have better luck during freezes, and they chose Fort Pierce, and that's why they were in Fort Pierce.
So what was it like to grow up in Fort Pierce?
It was during the war. Of course, we had a Navy base there. There were a lot of sailors. There was gas rationing, food rationing, shoes were rationing, and the beaches were full of tar that had washed in from the sunken boats offshore. So, but we went to the beach anyway, in spite of the tar.
There were German U-boats offshore during the war, and they were sinking merchant marine ships.
So taking a step back, please tell us about your family history. When did your family, your grandparents Hiram Smith and Cornelia, first come to Brevard?
My grandfather was born in New Jersey, and he had done extensive traveling in his younger years, and going from New Jersey to Connecticut and out west. And he his father had not encouraged him to get a formal education past the 6th grade. So he had a contract with a carriage builder in Newark, New Jersey, to teach him how to make carriages. And during his off hours, he spent all of his spare time in the Newark Library studying to learn what he had not been able to learn in school. And so he stayed in Newark for 2 years and moved to a place in Connecticut and did the same. Then he moved west and got as far west as, I think, Council Bluff, Idaho. And by then he was a school teacher. And he when he decided that he would return, and of course he traveled a lot on the rivers, and he came down the Mississippi, and he ended up in the Selma area of Alabama, and he started a factory building his own carriages there. And that's where he met his future wife, Margaret Cornelia Coates, and she was known as Corny. And even her marriage license had the name Corny on it, not her full name. And circumstances became unpleasant there, and he decided that he wanted to move further south. And so his older brother Edmund from New Jersey, came, and the two of them traveled on a buckboard to Florida and toured a pretty big area to decide where Hiram wanted to make his home. And when he arrived in this area, he fell in love with it. And he said, this is where I would like to make my future home. And of course, the Bible says to build your house upon a rock. And this is a rocky area. And so he went back to Alabama, and he closed out his carriage. He sold his business, and he left there to come back alone with $100 in his pocket and his buckboard and his animal, I assume was a mule. And when he got here, he started building a 2-room log cabin, and he dug a shallow well for drinking water. And at the time, you could swim in the river; it was clear, but you couldn't drink the water. And anyway, when he got a place where he could bring his wife and my father, who was 3 years old at the time, here, they came here in 1864, and that's where they set up their home. And he was clearing the land because he had to have an income. And he came from a family that was engaged in agriculture, so he knew how to grow things. And so he started clearing the land to plant his citrus. And when at the time he was building this house and building his business up.
So was there at one time a house behind yours or a house behind Lawndale that was the original wood cabin that your grandfather built? Was there a house behind yours or the house behind Lawndale that was the original log cabin that your grandfather built?
Was it what?
The original log cabin that your grandfather built, was that directly behind Lawndale?
No,
It was next door.
No, it was a couple hundred feet to the south of Lawndale.
To the south of Lawndale.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the yard where your house is now.
Uh-huh. But he was building Lawndale, and he had started digging and cutting coquina out from under this house, and the well that he built, a 20-foot shallow well, is completely lined, beautifully lined with coquina stones. And it's too bad that no one will ever see it again, because it was it looked like a work of art, how he used those coquina stones to line the well.
And this is a well that is in your yard currently.
Correct.
Okay. Wow. And it's covered now.
Yes, it's covered.
It's covered now.
So it'll never be exposed again.
And
well, one time we found a possum in the well, and my husband had put a ladder in the well for the possum to climb out.
Poor fellow. And how deep was this well?
20 feet, I think
20
she said.
feet. Okay. Wow. So, do you personally remember your grandparents, Hiram and Cornelia?
Well, my grandfather died before I was born. He died in 1921, and I was born in 1926. His wife, my grandmother, died in 1930, a month after my father was killed in a tragic grove accident in Fort Pierce. So my father was buried in this area on my 4th birthday, and I do not have any memories of them because I was only 4 years old.
I'm sorry. So, what was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Ella Dennis Gordy, she was a young widow. Her first husband died in Philadelphia in the big flu death problem up there. And so she was a young widow when he was introduced to her in Philadelphia by a mutual friend. And then when he was killed in this accident, she was a young widow again by the time she was 32 years old.
Wow. So what are your earliest memories of Rockledge? Did you visit Lawndale as a child?
My mother would drive up from Fort Pierce and bring my brother and me for a visit to Aunt Myra. But of course, it wasn't on any regular schedule. But she did bring us to visit Aunt Myra, who was living here.
Who was living here? And who else was living at Lawndale at that time?
She lived alone. In the winter, she had some cousins that would come down and spend the winter, and they occupied these two rooms during the winter, and Cousin Gus and Cousin Francis. And I never knew their last name, but I think their name was Ward, and I believe that Walter Ward was the son of Hiram's sister, Lydia Ann.
Okay. And what did you do when you graduated high school? What did you do when you graduated high school?
When I graduated from high school, I spent the first year in Fort Pierce, and then I decided that I would go to Atlanta. I had secured a job with Delta Airlines, and so I went to Atlanta and worked for the airlines. That was my first job.
Were you a flight attendant? Were you a flight attendant?
Was
Delta Airlines flight attendant? I think she was in ticket sales.
Ticket sales?
Yeah. I was in the reservations office at the airport, and then they moved our operation from the airport to downtown Atlanta, and I worked there, and then in the ticket office. And that's Eastern Airlines was next door, and my future husband worked there.
Is that how you met your future husband?
Huh?
Is that how you met your husband?
Yes.
Oh.
He worked next door to where I worked in downtown Atlanta.
And what was his name?
Robert Louis Rainwater.
Louis Rainwater. And when did you marry Robert Louis?
When did we move here?
When did you get married to Robert Louis?
We got married in December the 9th, 1952. We were married in the chapel at Emory University, which is, that's Decatur, just out of Atlanta.
And did you attend Florida State University at one point? Did you attend Florida State University at one point?
Florida State University, it was originally called something else.
Well, when I finished my junior year in high school, I needed one credit to graduate. And I went to Florida Southern in the Lakeland summer school and got that credit. And by then, it was too late to be accepted at Florida State College for Women in Tallahassee. So I spent my freshman year at Florida Southern in Lakeland. And then I came back and graduated with my high school class in 1944. And I graduated from Florida State in 1947. And it was made co-ed my junior year. And my diploma has both names on it. Florida State College for Women and Florida State University.
Wow.
In 1947.
That must have been a big change, allowing the boys on campus.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So what was your major in college?
My sociology.
Sociology?
I had one professor I majored in, Dr. Bellamy. Whatever he told, I took because he was an amazing man that had, he had been exposed to so many things during his life. For instance, he and his wife attended a fair in Tallahassee, and he saw quilts that were made by different women that they got blue ribbons for. He says, I can do that. I have a picture of him with a guy with a blue ribbon that he made a quilt to prove he could do the same thing.
He could do anything.
Yes, he was an amazing man.
Wow, sounds like an awesome person to study under.
Yes, he had invited me to come back to be his graduate assistant, but I wanted to travel. And he said, when he invited me, he says, now you know, if you do that, you'll be an old maid.
But that didn't happen because you met Robert. So where did you and Robert live after you were first married?
What are you doing?
Where did you and Robert live after you were first married?
We lived in Eastport, Georgia.
Eastport, Georgia.
Which is a suburb of Atlanta.
And then you moved back to Rockledge in 1955 to
Well,
care for...
I didn't move back because I had never lived here.
Okay.
But we arrived here October the 15th of 1955.
Okay.
And my first son, Michael, was born in February.
In February.
So,
Yes.
and he was born in what I call the little matchbox on the hill, which was just a tiny little hospital at the time. Westhoff Hospital.
Westhoff Hospital. And why did you move to Rockledge in 1955?
My aunt was elderly. For all practical purposes, she was legally blind. She was still driving. She had two automobiles, and a 28 Model A sedan and a 1938 Buick sedan. And the movies changed twice a week at the State Theater, and she drove the A model on Wednesday, and she drove the Buick on Sunday. But she was having a hard time with her eyesight because she was a voracious reader. She subscribed to 4 different newspapers. She had every week she'd get stacks of magazines, and she read it and I imagine she read most of those books up in the library. She loved to read.
Wow.
And she was getting so she couldn't read.
That must have been very hard for her.
Yes, it was difficult.
And who was living in Lawndale at that time? Was it your family and your aunt and Aunt Myra?
She was living alone.
She was living alone.
Yes.
And then your family moved in.
Yeah.
Yes. So what was your Aunt Myra's personality like, and what were her interests?
What was that?
What was your Aunt Myra's personality like, and can you tell me more about her interests other than reading?
What was her personality like and her interests?
Well, reading was her main interest, and I understand that when she was a younger woman, she was very active in a lot of things. But as she aged, she was still active in the local citrus growers association because she was running her father's citrus groves. Of course, the packing house was no longer operating at that time.
So how extensive would your grandfather's groves have been in 1955?
How extensive was it?
How extensive?
Well, it extended from the back of Lawndale to what is now US 1 and the railroad track, and across the railroad.
And who was managing the groves at that time?
Well, she was managing the groves until as long as she lived.
As long as she
But
lived.
she had a man on Merritt Island that would order fertilizer and see that the crops were picked for her. So, those sort of things.
Do you remember the name of that gentleman?
His name was Walter LaRoche.
Walter LaRoche.
Yes.
So, can you describe what this neighborhood was like in the 50s and 60s?
What was like?
What this neighborhood was like in the 50s and 60s, or Rockledge in general?
Well, it was just a bedroom community, really. There were too many houses on the river, and the subdivisions were, Valencia had been developed into a subdivision, and but it was, but we really had some very nice stores here that later closed. But we did have some very nice stores.
What were the stores?
What were the stores? Well, there was Sears, Sears Roebuck. There was, well.
Was it a Woolworths in downtown Cocoa?
Yeah, what?
A Woolworths?
Yeah, a Woolworths. That was in downtown Cocoa, though. The Woolworths was. But there were two drugstores in downtown Cocoa at the time, and that's where we went for for drugs and related items. But we had Rockledge was growing, but it was of course it grew in connection with what Cocoa was doing.
So, where would have been like the nearest doctor if you needed to go see the doctor?
The doctor?
Mm-hmm.
When I came here, my aunt's doctor was Dr. Thomas Caniston Sr. And he had a clinic in downtown Cocoa.
Okay.
But her doctor, when she was born, was out from Cocoa.
From Cocoa.
Yes, but that was she was born in 1877. So
you would go over to Cocoa. And did you have any favorite restaurants in the area when you moved to Rockledge?
Did I have what?
A favorite restaurant in the area when you moved to Rockledge?
Favorite restaurants in the area?
Yes, Hub's Inn on the river north of Cocoa was our very favorite, and there was people would come from Orlando or all around to eat on Sunday at Hub's Inn.
Must have been delicious.
It was built out on the river, and if you saw it and didn't know his reputation, you would not have gone in it.
Oh no!
Yeah, but they always served. They had they served cranberry conserve and Ritz crackers, and that was your appetizer when you were waiting for your meal, and you could get a delicious meal for $3.50. I mean, that was really a nice meal.
Sounds like a bargain. So, did you all have any family traditions that you practiced here at Lawndale, like maybe during the holiday times, or did you have any family traditions?
Any what?
Family traditions.
Traditions?
Yes.
Well, of course, we celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we always celebrate those traditions.
Mother was a very good cook, and we always had great Thanksgiving dinners. Usually friends over.
What would your mother cook?
Well, she would make turkey, and she would make dressing with apples in it, and she would make real mashed potatoes and green beans and carrots and pumpkin pie.
And I always cooked 7 pounds of carrots. Because my older son loved carrots, and when he was a child, my older son would eat anything. He would take a small can of spinach, open it, and eat it as a snack. And Mark, he liked tomatoes and green beans, and that was it. And he wouldn't touch anything else. And one Thanksgiving, he came in after visiting a friend for Thanksgiving, and I had the leftovers on the counter, and he started eating. He says, "This is good." I said, "It's always been good, but you wouldn't give it a chance." And now he eats everything inside.
One of my favorite restaurants in the 60s was the Trade Winds Cafeteria. We could go in there and we'd get it was like a homemade chocolate cream pie for dessert. I remember that. And they also made a great trout almondine with a locally caught trout. Were some of my favorites.
Speaking of pies, I heard that your mother might have had a famous cake that all the neighbors liked, or a pie that all the neighbors liked. Is that true?
She often would make cakes every, Thursday? And one of the neighborhood kids, or some of them, would show up on Thursday because they knew that the cake was going to be ready that day.
I made a pound cake every Thursday.
Every Thursday. Sounds delicious. So, what was the hardest part about living in Rockledge? Was there anything difficult about living here?
Well, when you're busy, you can't pick out things that were hard. You just tackle them. I don't say it was hard.
Early on, there was no air conditioning.
Yeah.
And we were way younger then and could tolerate it better. So,
I know when my aunt became to the point that her doctor said she should be in a nursing home, he said, and there were just a few nursing homes in Brevard at the time. One is in Melbourne, one on Merritt Island, and one in Titusville. So my husband and I got in the car and we went to visit these places. And of course, the best place was it was in an old home, was on Merritt Island. And when I went in by myself to look, and I came out, and my husband said, "I see you vetoed that." I said, "All I can judge is I wouldn't want to be here." And so we told the doctor that I wanted to keep her at home. He says, "Only if you have an air conditioner in the room where she will sleep." And the hospital furnished her with, she had always been very generous to the hospital, and they reciprocated by furnishing her a hospital bed and all the linens. And so that's what we did. And she died in the room that's the dining room, which was air conditioned with the hospital bed.
Wow, wow. Well, she was in the home that she loved. So, what do you remember some of the early launches into space from Cape Canaveral? You were here as NASA was developing.
The launches?
Yes.
I remember we were asleep, and I was awakened by a noise, and I looked out the window, and it was like daylight, and it was the middle of the night, and it was the first launch that I was ever aware of.
Wow, that's a great story.
Launches were few and far between in 1955.
Mm-hmm. And so, what are some of the major changes you've witnessed? You've witnessed to this area. What are some of the major changes you've witnessed?
What are
major changes to the area?
Well, traffic. Just seeing how the area has grown and the direction that it's going.
Yes, it's definitely grown. What is your hope for Lawndale's future? What is your vision for Lawndale's future?
Well, I hope that we will always keep in mind that this is an area for the people, and the people should be happy to live here.
Absolutely.
We want people to stay because they're happy here.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful place. And Mark, can I ask you some questions now?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. So, where were you born and when?
I was born in Wusthof Hospital in the late 50s, and then I was raised here. I've been here most of my life.
Tell us about growing up at Lawndale.
Oh, it was awesome. It was.
He used to slide down the rail banister.
Oh, you're mischievous.
There were some little grooves from his belt buckle, almost, but he used to slide down those.
I grew up, we had 40 acres of grove out back. It was like just a giant playground, and we could go out there and have orange fights with our friends and just have all the, in the season, we could go pick all the oranges we wanted to eat, and there was even antique bottles out there that got me started bottle collecting. I used to find them out there. And growing up here in the early 60s, there were the launches, the Apollo program. It was a historic time with Walter Cronkite and all the guys going to the moon, and just seeing the crowds on the causeways, and the huge Atlas rockets going up, and the Saturn V. It was a really special time.
We would have notable people like Walter Cronkite come to the area, but there was one big the surf restaurant on South Cocoa Beach, and the Mousetrap was and some friends came over from Maitland to visit, and it's the Mousetrap, and Walter Cronkite and Dinah Shore were there, and so my friend and I went up and talked to them, and my husband and her husband were just they were embarrassed that we would do that. I said, well, they're famous because people recognize them.
In the 60s, this area was called the trout capital of the world, and you could go out there with a fishing plug, and almost every cast you'd get a trout or a trout bite. So one of my favorite Christmases, when I was probably 8 or 10 years old, I got some new fishing equipment, and my brother and I went down to the dock down there, and within an hour we had a whole stringer full of trout. So that was awesome. And then just growing up along the river bank, all the river to explore, walking along the rocks. If we could do things back then people probably wouldn't allow you to do anymore. People would be afraid of.
But he and a buddy would go out in the river with a rake, and they'd rake the bottom of the river looking for these antique bottles.
With a pitchfork, you could jab the bottom and find them.
And he's quite a serious antique bottle collector now.
And we were pretty bad with there was all kind of puffer fish out in the river, and they would steal our bait, and we weren't too nice to them. Mm-hmm. Kind of regret that, and the river was so clean, you could wade out in the cove down there, and you could see the bottom all over the place. And it was just.
That was beautiful.
Sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
And what are the buildings that you remember on the property?
Well, I remember over at John Seaman's house next door, there was a huge barn over there. And then directly behind the house there was an outhouse, and then a little over there was a chicken coop and a gas house, and then down by the road there was a one-car garage that I think that held the A model. And then just north of the barn was another one-car garage that held the 38 Buick. And I remember when I was a teenager or younger, I went to climb through a busted window to look at the Buick. And I got to the window, and then I saw, it looked like somebody sitting behind the steering wheel of the Buick, and it was in my own reflection. I scared myself. That was kind of funny.
Speaking of being scared, did I hear that some of the neighborhood children were scared of Lawndale?
Yes, that's during growing up. We rarely ever had kids come for Halloween, and then one time my brother had one of his friends attempt to stay overnight and he didn't make it till about midnight. This house, when the wind's blowing, you can hear creaky noises, and it's kind of, if you're not used to it, it might be kind of spooky for some people.
And were there still citrus groves on the property? You mentioned there were citrus groves. At what point were there no longer any groves?
Probably the early 70s, they went away.
And what do you remember about your Aunt Myra?
Oh, by the time I knew of her, she was pretty sick, and the only thing I really remember is her being an infirm woman in a bed with cats on top of her, keeping her company. And I didn't really get to know her or anything like that.
And what do you hope for Lawndale's future?
Well, I hope that it keeps going and becomes something nice for a long time. Sometimes I fear the economy might go bad and the money might dry up, but with all the good people of the neighborhood supporting it, it looks pretty positive.
When he finished high school, he wanted, of course, young kids want to get out and have their own money. He got a job with a construction company. He got tired of pounding nails in the hot sun. And so we asked him if he would like to go back to school and get something that he could enjoy. And he's the type, you don't tell him what to do, you plant a seed and then you back off. And so a couple of weeks later he says, I think I would like to go back to school. And he decided to go over to Winter Park to a technical college and learn how to repair electrical things like copy machines and that. And he lived over there for what?
It was a 9-month technical diploma.
Yeah.
It opened the door for getting into a company called Lanier for business equipment. I worked there for a while.
And he got disgusted because the companies they would use generic parts to repair things, and he was a troubleshooter, and he had to go behind and straighten out things. And so we decided to ask him again if he'd like to go back to school. Well, he went to the University of Central Florida, and I'm proud to say that he graduated with honors as an electrical engineer.
Very smart.
I first showed up to what used to be Brevard Community College, and Don Argo out there, he saw me and says, Rainwater, what are you doing out here? It's like, almost like, I thought we got rid of you. That was my first career in college. Didn't go so well because I wasn't as serious as I should have been.
Yeah. Well, this Dr. Argo was head of the math department, and we had met him one day. He was interested in history. He was writing a book, and he came on a motorcycle one day and to ask questions to help him write this book. And we got to know him pretty well. When Mark entered his math class, he said, what are you doing here? You know you can't cut it. And he got a certificate as the head of the math department.
I won an award that year.
But it was a challenge to him. He said, Dr. Argo says, you know you can't cut it.
It's a little motivation. So when did you move back to Rockledge?
Well, I was here most of my life. I went over to Tampa for a few years, late, I think it was 1999, went over there, and I worked at a flight simulator company called Reflectome for a few years. And then after the 9/11 attacks, the economy and the flight industry went bad, and they decided to sell out to a company in Canada, and they laid people off, and they actually offered me the opportunity to go up to Canada and help train our replacements. Not very nice of them, but so then I came back here probably 2003.
And what are the changes have you witnessed any changes since 2003 to this area?
Well, the traffic's gotten way worse. It seems like some of our old stores are not good like they used to be. Like we lost the Sears Town, and there used to be Goodings and Bells, and I guess we've been shipping off our jobs to China, which has me pretty disgusted and kind of concerned about all that.
So, do you have any final memories or stories you'd like to share before this interview concludes?
Oh. Let's see. Oh, I guess I told you about orange fighting. We were kids. We were in elementary school. We go out there after school and have orange fights, and then junior high, and then finally when we got to be 16 or 17, the oranges. We got so big, the oranges really started to hurt. And then one day they all ganged up on me, and so I just ran home and went home and had lunch, and they were all over the grove looking for me. And that probably ended that. But it was fun. Some of those kids when they're 16, 17, they could throw like 90 miles an hour on us. So.
Sounds dangerous.
My brother was in Babe Ruth, so he could really let them go.
Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask?
What happened at the packing house?
Oh, the packing house. Well, it was abandoned after the groves went defunct, and we used to go out there and play. And there was those Lawndale wrappers were all over the place in that place. And what I heard, the place caught on fire, and I think there were some kids out there smoking and accidentally set it on fire. I'll be kind and not mention their names.
I have one of those wrappers. The rest of them all burned up, but I have a total of one wrapper.
Where was the packing house?
It was out in River Ridge. The tallest point is near where there was a cistern out there that they collected water, and I would say the packing house was maybe 100 yards north, kind of northwest of that.
There was actually a railroad spur that came into your grandfather's property, into the property too.
Right, and Mother said they could haul citrus in and out of it with that, or was it fertilizer? I can't recall. Maybe it was both. And then out near the highway there was a pump house. They must have had a pretty big pump. She said there was a deep well out there with really good water.
Shallow water that they used, one of those old Fairbanks Morse pumps.
I remember one of my...
You could only pump water for 15 minutes and then the well would go right. And that was our main source of good water.
Was the well?
Mm-hmm.
I was out walking through the woods one day, I was probably 15, 16, and I saw these baby raccoons. And then I went and I grabbed one by the back of the neck, and I've never seen anything so fierce with that little, it was like a little Tasmanian devil. And he was making so much racket, I let him go and just ran away because I was afraid his mother was going to come along and chew me up.
Other than raccoons, what other kinds of wildlife would you see out there when you were playing?
Things that would scare me is once in a while you'd come up upon quail, and they would just explode when they're taking off, the sound of them, and that would startle you. And there used to be probably 9-10 foot coach whip snakes out there, and when you'd come upon them, they'd make a big racket when they would run off. You'd both run two different ways.
Sounds smart. Does anyone have any other questions?
I think you've done a very good job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret and Mark, so much for your time.
There was a big rattlesnake out behind the barn one time. So Those were back there at times. And then one time there was a big bobcat out back, and Dad shot over the top of it with a shotgun. And there was turkeys out there.
And peacocks, we had peacocks that would show up on occasion. Yeah.
One year my brother shot one of those turkeys and we had it for Thanksgiving.
Now you have foxes.
And now you have foxes on your property.
Yeah.
My great grandfather wouldn't allow those. They don't get along with raising chickens.
No. Natural enemies.
But there were a lot of different type of varieties of citrus that were growing because he experimented with and reported to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He would report how he was doing, and so we had a good variety of fruit, and some of them you don't even hear of anymore. And
So your grandfather experimented with the citrus.
Yeah. But we had, had king oranges and we had temples. Temple was, I guess, my favorite. And we had grapefruit. The best is the Duncan, and most people don't want the Duncan because it's so full of seed. But I like the Duncan better than any grapefruit. And we had different varieties of pink grapefruit, white grapefruit. And it was interesting to have the fruit selection we had.
Absolutely.
We had
Didn't Aunt Myra try to raise pineapples next door?
she grew pineapples, and she had so much problem with the rats would get in the pineapples, and she would correspond with a teacher in Fort Pierce that I knew in Fort Pierce. He was an expert on pineapples, and she would correspond with him about growing pineapples. And she would, she had so many that she would furnish fruits, any excess. She had peaches, she had persimmons, she had, and she would send them to the hospital. And the hospital would use these things. They had a man named George Humphrey that would come, and she had chickens, and she would send any eggs to the hospital. So
she was very generous to the hospital.
Yeah, she was very, very generous with that hospital. She gave them a piece of property that had belonged to my brother, and I had a half interest in it, and she had the other half interest. And she asked us if we would let her have our half interest because the property it was across the railroad, and it said, I don't know what we'd do with it, so we gave it to her. She turned around and gave it to the hospital, and the hospital sold it to the city of Rockledge, where the sewer plant is now. And she was furious because the hospital used a broker to handle the sale, because she felt with all the educated people on the hospital board, they had the expertise to sell that property and not have to pay, their commission. So there's a plaque on the second floor by the elevator dedicating that section of the hospital to her name. You have a picture of it on your, what do you call your brain? Dr. Keniston Sr. made sure that they gave her some recognition, but she didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she was just a generous person.
She was a generous person. She cared about her community.
Well, she would give away. She inherited a little money from Cousin Gus and Cousin Francis, and she turned around and gave it to the hospital. When it came time to pay taxes, she was borrowing money from my uncle in Fort Pierce to pay her taxes.
Wow. Very generous.
No.
One follow-up question that I thought of was, who managed your father's groves in Fort Pierce after he passed away?
My mother's brother became because of my mother coming from Philadelphia, and she was born in Maryland. Her family, which consisted of an older brother and two twin brothers, moved to Fort Pierce from Maryland, and he became an expert in citrus, and he owned a fertilizer company in Fort Pierce, and he was gonna. He and a friend were going to sell this fertilizer company to W.R. Grayson Company, and he made the appointment for them to come down and meet him to discuss the details. And his hours were 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. Well, that's when he required these people to show up, and that's when he was, and probably most of them were just usually going to bed about that time and coming from New York. But he did, he sold his business to, he was able to manage it.
His name was Al Gordy.
Yeah, his name Al Gordy. And
there still are Williams down in Fort Pierce.
You still have family down in Fort Pierce?
do I have family? Yes, I have. My brother's deceased, but he has one. He had 2 sons. One disappeared in a plane accident in 1980, but they were all pilots, and my brother was a crop duster, and the younger son, the older son, is still living down there. He's Carole Williams Jr. I have him, and he has a son who came up to visit Lawndale with his wife and 3 children. And I have some cousins through the Gordy family still in that area. My mother came from a line of family named Gordy, and there were 3 brothers that were shipwrecked in New Jersey, and 3 of them, one stayed in that area, one went to Atlanta, and one went out west. And her family was from the one that went to Atlanta. And there was a big company in Atlanta called the Gordy Tar Company. And the prominent name in the Gordy family was Jimmy Carter's mother was a Gordy. Wow. So I'm his 6th cousin.
With Jimmy Carter.
I miss
your cousin. Very cool.
Yeah, but the family is pretty well spread out.
All right. Well, are there any other final memories or stories you'd like to share?
Well, I guess we could tell them about the pet gopher turtle. There used to be big gopher turtles out in the woods, and we found one that had been hit by a front end loader or something, or some kind
Had a hole in the back of its shell.
Oh no.
It was a big gopher turtle, and somehow we brought it back to the house, and Dad was a medic. He was a Navy medical corpsman in World War II, and so he doctored up this gopher turtle, and he put antibiotic in it, and bandaged it all up, and his name was George the turtle.
He put a strip of Johnson & Johnson tape across this hole, and then the turtle left. And about 1 year later, that turtle showed up, and that bandage was still on that turtle.
You rehabilitated him.
And we also had a duck pen.
Huh?
Remember, you want to tell them about the ducks?
We had some ducks, and there was a duck pen out there, and the ducks would become a nuisance because they would go down and to eat the acorns that had been mashed by the automobile tires on the river road, and it was really getting to be a real problem, and so we decided we better get rid of those ducks. And because there was one duck that was bigger than all the rest of them, and he's the only one we named. We called him Rock Bottom because we never saw him fly. and
He was the last one to learn how to fly because he was so big.
Yeah, he was so big. And so we had friends that we had built a new home up on Twin Lakes in Cocoa, north of Cocoa, and they had ponds up there. So our friends were Beverly and Wes Hauser, and they said they'd like some of those ducks, so we gave some of those ducks.
Well, it was all the ducks, didn't we get rid of them?
Wes and one of his came to pick up these ducks and took them back to the pond. Well, they were a gift to Wes, and about a month or so, Wes said, you know, it's just we thought you were doing us a favor giving us those ducks, but we were doing you a favor to take them. They were feeding them. They were buying food, corn and corn, and anyway, Rock Bottom ended up coming back here.
He flew here somehow. He
He got here somehow.
He missed home.
Yeah. But he was the only one that came back. I don't know whatever happened to him, but he was a huge duck.
And Twin Lakes, like 5 or 6 miles north of here. I think it is.
Good sense of direction. Did Aunt Myra keep any other animals on the property besides ducks? Or...
Well, in the barn, I know there was a place, they must have had horses. I don't remember any horses. She probably does. They had horses. Did they have a cow or pigs or anything like that?
They had 2 horses, Nellie and Dolly, but I don't remember. I'm sure they had a cow for milk. Because he you know, that people grew what they used for food. And people would say, you can't grow this or grow that. Well, he would get some of it and show them that it could be grown in this area.
Wow. And, oh, sorry.
There was actually 2 barns. Wasn't there a smaller, really old barn? And then we had the bigger, newer barn. I almost forgot about that older barn.
Yeah.
And where was the older barn?
Yeah, it was just out a little bit west of the newer barn.
And the newer barn was where again?
Over at John Seaman's house, just kind of, almost just maybe a couple 100 feet that way.
Okay. Do you know where your grandparents or your Aunt Myra might have had a vegetable garden on the property? Where they grew food?
Do you know where they might have had a vegetable garden?
Not really. We had a vegetable garden one year. My son Mike and a friend of his planted a big garden in the back, and it was a beautiful, and we had a good yield from it. And the only source of water we had was Cocoa City water, and it got so expensive having to use that city Cocoa water to irrigate that we gave that up.
Too costly. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing all these amazing stories with us.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Hope you get 100 A+.
we're grateful that so many people are interested in this now, and hope that the interest will remain high.
It's such a rich history worth preserving. Thank you so much, Margaret and Mark.
You're welcome.
Thank you.